Hey, my name is Ritu, and as you know, I'm a transformation coach specializing in women's health, fitness, and nutrition. So you might be following me for a while, and you've probably seen a lot of my content on Instagram, or perhaps you've been watching via YouTube, or you've been listening to the podcast. You've seen some of my client results. You've seen a snapshot into me, maybe a couple of things about how the Girl Boss method works, how the program works, and maybe a little bit of like myth busting stuff. But what you might not know is the real story behind all of this and me, because I haven't always had it together and I've had burnout in the past. I've had niggles and injuries that I've had to work through that led me not to being able to train properly. And I've made many mistakes over the course of my career and life. And these are some of the things that I help my clients avoid. And so I'm going to talk to you about my journey through, the good, bad, and the ugly. So all through various different stages. And I'm going to talk to you about how I've developed my method and built my method that's helped thousands of women get strong, get lean, and get confident. So let's take it back to the beginning. So here's a throwback picture, and this is probably about 15 years old. And this has taken me back to a time when I was at university. So about 15 years ago. So we're actually going to go a little bit further back than that because I've actually been in the fitness arena as a fitness professional since the very early 2000s. And my first job in a gym was in 2004, and I worked in a health club, and it was a well-known chain, a health club chain, way back when. You can't find these clubs, they're not around anymore, but it was a very, very long time ago. And I started off working in a gym. I was a gym instructor and I taught classes as well. I then sort of transitioned into various different roles. I actually found myself heading off to back into gymnastics. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. But gymnastics was my first love. It's something that I did as a child. I can't say I was the most talented gymnast, but coaching, yeah, that came pretty naturally. And yeah, further along from that, I changed jobs and I found myself working more in towards sort of the fitness centers that were run by sort of local boroughs, London boroughs, that sort of thing. And those became very diverse roles where I wasn't directly involved in fitness, but I was, helping in various different sports, setting up sports and, you know, taking down equipment and setting up equipment and running courses and all sorts of things. So more of a operational type job. And then I found myself again moving further along within this sort of health club industry back into a premium health club. And I spent a couple of years there. And it was at this point that I found myself moving away from fitness within this time. And I guess you could say that I started to neglect my own health in some ways. And this is a sort of around my early 20s. And I'd actually taken a gym membership management role, and it was very admin and office based. I was not in the gym or customer facing. And it was at that point I had a turning point within my life where I had decided to just completely leave the industry. And I thought, you know what? I feel like I need to do some more learning and some more growing. And so I decided to go to university, and I was 26 when I went to university. And so that's this picture here. And I went and studied sports therapy. Now, during this period, um, as you know, when you go to uni, your health definitely takes a dip. And even though I was learning about sports science and training lots, etc., I was still, you know, living off pizza, spending my student loan on obscene amounts of food. And you could say that I was going through a coping mechanism through food. I had sort of experienced some sort of personal struggles, as I guess most of us do around our sort of early mid 20s. And yeah, it didn't take, it took me until sort of around 2015, so many years later, when I decided to sort of restart my fitness journey. And 2015 was sort of as I was finishing and graduating from university, that I kind of, from graduating, from doing the study, from doing, the degree, I started working on myself to rebuild and become a better me. But all along this time, and sort of bubbling throughout my life and my career, gymnastics has always been a theme. So I grew up doing gymnastics, and I actually started coaching when I was about 14. It's kind of what you do when you're not a great gymnast, you become a coach. And I love the sport. So again, it was at this point, and this isn't later on, this is around again the early 20s. This is always bubbling through. Even whilst I was at university, I was still doing this. I realized that I was great with my communication skills, and I had great eye for detail as well, because gymnastics is a very intricate sport, and there's a lot more finer details that you need to focus on, whether it's, the skills itself and the tumbles, or it's the performance element. And you could say there's been loads of, reawakenings that I've been going through. And in my late 20s, I went vegan. So I went vegan, and the main thing was for ethical reasons. And I, at this point, again, this, you could say this is during sort of university, I thought I was doing everything right. I was eating clean. I was training 5 times a week. I was following all these random fitness pages, and back then we had Pinterest, or we had sort of other different pages online. And I was confused because right here you can tell this, it's almost, that doesn't look like me, right? It's unrecognizable. And during this time, going through this transition, again, eating healthy and wondering what's going on. I was in my late 20s, and I felt fat, I felt bloated, and I felt massively out of shape. I think at my heaviest, I was 78 kilos. And at this time, I had like heel pain. I recall having, heel pain, and I thought that it was just down to, me. Is this what aging feels like? Is this something that happens when you get old? And well, spoiler alert, it wasn't. And I should have known this, because at the time I'm studying sports therapy, you're learning, all things about physiology and injuries and anatomy. But yeah, I was training hard, and I had no idea how to properly curate vegan nutrition, let alone anything else. And I looked at magazines, and I looked at, random things that I saw online. I was definitely under eating in protein. I was very likely overdoing it in cardio, because I thought, back then especially, that was a trend, and that was the thing to do. And every weekend I would turn it into some sort of cheap binge scenario, because during the time in the fitness world, that was the thing, and that was seen as pretty glamorizing. So I didn't understand vegan nutrition. And again, I thought that I tried to out train my diet. So I did find lifting. I got back into the gym and you know, ate clean and then, binged at the weekends. And I recall some of the things that I would eat as a vegan early on would be things like packets of like poi lentils and quinoa like mixed in a packet pouch thing that I would then put loads of vegetables in. Like, so I'd put in like tomatoes or like cucumbers or something, and then I would just put like beans and just put a little bit of like paprika or salt on them or something, and then just put that in Tupperware. It was revolting and gross. If I put it frankly, it was awful. And I would make my own masses of hummus. And I thought, yeah, I'm making my own hummus. This is what vegans do. And I would make these like red kidney bean hummuses, these like black bean hummuses, and normal your chickpea hummus. And I would use obscene amounts of olive oil in these hummuses. And I'll tell you now, that is probably how I started amassing weight and I started putting on weight. And I was following like fitness influencer routines. So yes, I trained as a gym instructor back in the day, and um, I was working in gyms and I was teaching classes and I was doing courses, and then I went and did, again, I actually did with gymnastics, got very highly qualified in gymnastics as well. I had a career literally spanning well over a decade or 15 years or something, long, long time working within that field. And it was always a like an evening job or a weekend job for me. And when I was at uni, again, although I studied and I did this degree, we had a gym there and I'd go and use the gym and I was training. I had no real structure when it came to how to train and how to work out in the gyms. And again, I was just like following the fitness influencers of the time. So Erin Stern was like a bodybuilder back then, a figure athlete, and then I would sort of Google and try and find like other people that ate either like vegan or vegetarian, and try and have a look at their like meal plans online because people put things up on, forums and things. So yeah, I was copying just random stuff, and I'd have a little booklet because we didn't have things like apps then. You just have like a notebook, and I was old school, pen to paper, and writing down all my routines like 5 days a week. I used to train like a chest day, bizarrely as a woman, a chest day. I'd do a back day. There'd be like an arm day in there. There'd be like shoulders, and then there'd be like this legs, or was it shoulders and core? And then it would be legs. So there was no like separating it all. And do you know what? Going a bit old school, and the fact that I trained as a gym instructor way back when, when I was 20, in my early 20s, way, way back when, given that I'd done that and sort of the type of equipment that we had present in the gyms, and even back then, believe it or not, we had female gyms. Crazy. But resistance training was a thing, and the equipment was really good, and there was loads of stuff like, you could kind of use. And I guess me getting back into lifting in my late 20s, I started, training at this gym. As you can see the picture there, it was just like an old school bodybuilder type gym that was in a squash court, that an old squash court that was in the town that I lived in, and it had all these sort of makeshift pulleys and things, and you can see it there, just painful to look at, not flashy and nice. And I went in there and it got gritty, and I would train all the muscle groups using the barbells. I was doing deadlifts and squats, and again, I'd probably say that I learned a lot about technique and things off a lot of the guys that used to train there. Um, But yeah, again, just I lost some weight, you could say, just some, and again, got back into the gym, reignited that sort of love for lifting. But the scale was going up and down, and my energy was crashing, and I could never see the progress that I wanted. And I started making better choices with food, like maybe not so much in terms of like these binges at the weekend, but I was still winging it. I was winging it. And so I started researching and I spent time on, again, Googling, um, looking at macro splits. You'd see these people sort of, advising various different percentages for macro splits, and that was the way that you did it. And again, it wasn't calorie counting as such, it was more macro splits and then training splits and trying out different supplements. And I tell you what, this is when I started experimenting and finding out different, vegan supplements or vegan protein powders. And with some of these protein powders, they were disgusting. I remember mixing like a pure hemp protein, which was really super grainy, and mixing it with apple juice and literally holding my nose to back it. Um, it was disgusting. So I tried everything, and vegan protein powder now is incredible. It tastes so good. So yeah, being in this sort of environment as well, started building up new gym gear and, wrist straps and pulling straps and lifting belts and, barbell cushions, ankle straps as well. I remember I had to order them and you couldn't get them. They took about 3 months to come in the post, these little ankle straps that you'd put around to, for kickbacks and things. Um, and my barbell hip thrust actually the pad, and I still have it to this day, and I'm dead proud of it because I've never let it part from me. It's an old school York barbell pad that one might use for their back to squat. I use that on my hips because that's how I was taught or how I learned hip thrusting. And yeah, I got into bodybuilding as you would, right? Got really into it. And, again, searching online, seeing how these people train and wanting to build muscle. And I think, again, a lot of the connection for wanting to build muscle for me was also, it reminded me of my younger self, of how I really did love my training and when I was like in the gym at the beginning. But also, there was something in there that wanted me to feel strong, empowered, have muscle. And then one day it happened. I went to a bodybuilding convention. So it was Body Power years ago, because that was like a big thing back then. And you'd sort of meet other athletes, you'd meet other people. And I remember meeting other vegans as well, and that was super cool. So we started networking and connecting, and I met my first ever coach. I hired a coach, right? So I hired a coach. She's still an amazing friend of mine, and she had competed previously, but I got her to. We started hanging out and stuff. Realized that this Body Power event was in Birmingham. We realized we actually lived in like two towns apart or something. So we were about a 15-minute drive from each other. And I got to help me out with the nutrition. And so, it was macros, understanding macros more. It was, given a calorie target, some macros, and then sort of, a list of, what sort of things I should be eating as a vegan. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, let's do this. And got really into it. And yeah, just sort of coming back through this, yes, but we trained hard. I Googled everything and then discovered bodybuilding. I became so addicted to the process. And even during this time, I became quite isolated during my sort of, so I transitioned. I got myself a coach and we worked together and I started seeing changes. We discovered that I was over consuming the olive oil and that these insane cheap meals and stuff because I thought I was living like the rock at the weekends. were just not serving me. So we really stripped back, and I started to see physical changes once hiring a coach, despite the fact that I've got all this education so far. I, worked in the fitness industry, blah, 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 blah. Nobody really taught you about the stuff. So it was going through that change. And yeah, again, you can't out train a bad diet. Let's just put it rightly. My progress was insane. So, you know, the old school gyms, the serious lifting, the discipline. And the reason why I hired a coach is because I was training so hard, overtraining, constant soreness. Yeah, still struggling with like the binging and the weight swings and, up and down with all of that. I was struggling with that. And once I hired the coach, it changed everything because the progress was so good. I started to get leaner. I started to become stronger, and I got more structured. And because of that, I decided to start competing in these bikini fitness competitions. But there was a cost with the progress. Um, Became isolated as a result, avoided socializing, you know, again, the soreness and the recovery, and, it was just immense. I never thought I had any sort of problem with food. Even when I was bigger, I didn't admit and I didn't think I had a problem with food at all. I didn't think I just thought, oh, I just like eating. Like that was it. There was nothing else to it. There was no emotion with it for me. It was just I love food. I love food. And I wanted to compete, and it became very isolated, became very rigid. And off the back of competing, I would probably say that that's when I realized there was some disordered eating patterns. And I got tired, and I just didn't want to live like that forever. You go through some shit. You go through some shit with your mindset. You go through some stuff. There was some great things that came out of doing this. It was tunnel vision. It was digging deep. It was pushing through. It was having purpose. It was really understanding why I wanted to do this. And I really wanted to kind of push myself and prove to myself that I am that woman and I can become her. But it came at a cost, right? So here we have the highs and the lows. So this took me up to about my early 30s, I would say. I could be skewed with timelines, girls, honestly. Um, but here I am, right? So I stopped competing, and the thing for me is I really wanted to work on my long-term health. Um, One thing I didn't tell you was after I graduated from university, I actually went straight into personal training. I went back to the gyms and I was PTing. I was doing loads of in-person personal training sessions, up at 4, 5 in the morning, training people till, late sessions as late as 10 o'clock, having midday naps, having to train around this. And again, yeah, I was competing during this time as well. So it was just a complete shit show of everything all at once. And then again, with the soreness and stuff like that, the timing when I decided to stop competing and I wanted to focus on long-term health actually came about when I started working in physiotherapy clinics. And through the physiotherapy clinics, I discovered Pilates. And that took me on a real like rehabilitative journey for myself. I got to a point where I became more like balanced and sort of really started to take on board that there was a lot more to fitness than training hard and calories and macros. There was a lot around mindset. And there was a lot around all the other pillars as well that are massively important that people often think about, just being healthy and living a good lifestyle, like getting good sleep, not over consuming caffeine, because when I was competing and when I was PTing at the same time, I had these insanely long days. Um, it was manic, and I would just caffeine, Monster energy drinks, that was all the rage, pre-workouts, all the rage. And I wanted to focus. I left the stage behind and I wanted to focus on longevity. And so whilst I was working, there's so many different things happening all at once here. And I feel like I've left so much out of this as well. But I signed up to become an evidence-based nutritionist through a company called M&U, like amazing company, just incredible course as well. And through that studying, that actually, again, took me a really long time because I was working full time. I was in this sort of clinic with shift works there. And then I was also still PTing people outside of that, training myself, coaching gymnastics, doing absolutely everything, and then going, I'm going to do this full on, full time studying thing. And it didn't happen. And it basically took me until we kind of went into, I want to say when I finally left working physio and I started back working for myself, um, it took me that point. I set up my own Pilates studio from home and I was seeing one-to-one clients. I was doing sports massage. I was doing some rehab stuff. I was doing some fitness stuff as well through that. It took me, when we hit the pandemic, it took me that point to suddenly go, crap, I need to finish my training in nutrition. So I believe I signed up to my training in nutrition back in 2017, and I was studying and working at my own pace through the course, doing things, the modules and everything. And then, yeah, when the pandemic hit, I was like, right, I need to dive in and get through this. I'm one of those people, once I start something, I am not giving up. I must see three things through. I cannot start and open a new chapter without closing the doors on an old one. And it's something I've always tried to carry through with me. And it's something that I've really had to be disciplined with as I've developed and worked through my own career as well. I closed the door on like gymnastics. I closed the door on working for other people. Um, and yeah, it's just been a real journey. And when I look back, I've worked with literally thousands, thousands of individuals over the last 20 years. So, and this, I'm 41 now, right? So I'm taking this from being 20, let's say, when I first started working in a gym. So not even considering gymnastics here, considering that I was 20 and I was in a gym and I was in around those spaces. And I've had to close doors on so many different areas because insane amount of qualifications that I've done throughout this time, all within health and fitness, loads and loads of things, loads of people that I've worked with as well. People I've personal trained, people I've taught in like group classes, people I've taught like Pilates to, people I've helped rehab, people I've massaged, the insane amount of kids that I've worked with as well throughout gymnastics, throughout that career as well, throughout the years. I've worked with so many different bodies. And my eldest client was 97 years old, and my youngest client was about 6 months. Because, when you work in gymnastics, you work with, you have babies come in from really, really young. And so I've seen the length and the breadth of all those phases from young to old throughout the life. And, even when within physiotherapy, I was teaching, classes to oldies, people in their 80s and 90s, teaching exercise to them as well. So actually sort of more gym strength training, rehab focused exercises. So it's been a real breadth of my journey. And yeah, from physio to health clubs, members to Pilates and like one-to-one clients, I've taken all of this, I've taken a part of me and what I've been through, and I've taken my education and I've created my own method. So that one thing that sort of takes, the guesswork out of things for women that have been on a journey, you've been on your journey yourself, There's no fads here. There's no like extreme dieting. We're focusing on strength, structure, sustainable change, a system that really works for you, whether you are juggling, your career goals or, your own clients, whether you work as an entrepreneur yourself or business owner. You've got all these things, these different things, family as well, relationships, all these things that you're having to manage as well as trying to work on your fitness. So yeah, no extreme diets and no random workouts. So here I am. I'm 41 years old and I am still evolving. And honestly, every time I think about this, I feel like I'm just getting started again. I'm not where I want to be. I'm evolving as a person, both sort of professionally and personally. I've changed the way that I train, how I recover, and how I coach other women as well. And I know what it feels like to feel lost, stuck, unsure of what's actually working, making massive amounts of mistakes. But I also know that, you know, how you can get out of that place and how you can get out of that situation. And I'm not here to tell you that, it's all about eating less or doing more cardio. It's none of that. I'm here to help you lift heavy, fuel right, and build real confidence inside and out. So, if you're ready to stop starting over and finally feel proud of the way you train, the way you eat, and the way you live, all you got to do is message me on Instagram, the girl boss, and then we can build something real because your best body and your best energy, it doesn't come from starving or like punishing yourself. It comes from structure, support, mindset, and I've got you.